Hi everyone, it's Bilal here from Digital Wholesale Solutions. We'll just give a few people a bit more time to join the call. Okay, I think we'll crack on. So this is a webinar around ISOs. So an introduction to ISOs and how they can help you enable new business. I'm Bilal Khan, the Head of Compliance and Data Protection Officer for Digital Wholesale Solutions. So my team's responsibility extends across regulatory affairs and ISOs. So we cover Financial Conduct Authority, Ofcom, ethics, bribery. And we also look at our ISO management systems. So they are around quality management, information security, business continuity, and the environment. What I'm going to do is go through ISOs. So the International Organization for Standards is ISO. It's just the international body where all countries get together and agree a common way of working. We'll have a look at some of the different ISOs, what they cover, and some similarities as well, and how you can use that to your benefit. We'll have a look at a few points around if you're about to start your ISO journey, what you should do. And we'll also look at what you may already be doing, because it's about building on existing good practice. It's not about starting things from scratch, not necessarily in every area. And we'll have a look at some research that BSI, the British Standards Institute, commissioned. It was independent research to look at the benefits that standards provide to business and how that helps benefit with your customers and your supply chain, and to add value. So let's start with an introduction to ISO. So what ISOs are relevant to telecoms? Now there's a lot here. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go through every single one by one. We'll focus on 9001, which is for quality management, and 27001, which is information security. But there's a lot there you can see. So we have 14001 is an environmental management standard. Now, increasingly, it's becoming more popular. You're seeing more of that in RFI documents, bid documents, where customers are asking, what are your environmental credentials before we do business with you? If you're more technology-based, more service-based, you'll see a lot of reference to ISO 20000, which is IT service management. For those of you familiar with ITIL, it's the ISO version of ITIL. So a lot of the common things you'll see in the government IT infrastructure library of processes, such as problem management and change management, have been incorporated into ISO 20000. For information security, there are multiple standards underneath or as part of the ISO 20000 series. And we won't go into them in a great amount of detail, but it's worth calling them out, that some of them are very good. 27002 is detailed guidance around information security. 27005 covers information security risk. 27011 specific to telecoms, so it's the security standard for telecommunication services, and 27017 around cloud computing. Now, just to cover briefly 27005 around information security risk, what it does is it outlines how you would do, for want of a better phrase, information security risk management. So it'll walk you through how you do risk identification, how you turn that into evaluation of a particular risk, and then into the action you would take off the back of that risk. And following that cycle through, how you communicate with your company or the relevant people within your company for dealing with that particular risk, and then the monitoring to put in place. But it's a walkthrough. It's a really useful document if you've not done information security risk before, just to take some guidance. So for example, it will call out in relation to people security, who you should be thinking about. It will break down decision makers, users, operational staff, and developers, and the different risks associated with them. It'll also talk about how you can, or what you do with a risk. So a lot of people think, well, you accept a risk or you treat a risk. Well, it's not always the case. Yes, risk treatment, risk acceptance is a part of the piece, but you could also avoid risk as a strategy. You can transfer risk, and often when you're outsourcing, that is what you're doing. And it's worth knowing that that document there, 27005, is there to help guide you through that. There's a ISO on business continuity management. More and more, especially with what's going on in the world right now, customers are asking, what are you doing to ensure that in the event of an incident that you can recover? And there's an ISO for that. And also there's a generic risk ISO as well, which is 31000. So these are all relevant to telecoms. So that's not to say that if you were to go along on your ISO journey, you have to do all of them right now. It's not the case. Most people start with ISO 9001 and quality management because they're already doing huge amounts of that anyway. But what we'll focus on going forward is those two, 9001 and 27001. So quality management, what is it? So it's all these management systems on all these ISOs are generic. So they apply to any organization, doesn't matter how big or small you are. You can be a sole trader and have ISO 9001, or you can be a multinational organization with 100,000 employees and still have ISO 9001. Now, when I say it's an enabler for new business, it's because customers increasingly are expecting that as a minimum, you embed these 6 principles into your organization. Unsurprisingly, the first one is customer focus. So that's around having a process to capture customer specifications and then to follow through with that when you're onboarding them as a new customer, making sure you meet those specifications. If there are issues, that you're resolving them and capturing why you're resolving. It's about leadership commitment. So people at the top, and this goes to your CEO, your MD, engaging in this process, making sure that there's resources available, that there's a commitment that you will conform to processes if they're set out, that you won't wing it, for want of a better phrase. And as part of that, it's engaging with people. So your workforce should know. ISO isn't something done by 2 or 3 members of a company. It should be done by all members of the company. They should all have access to processes. They should all have access to relevant training if it's applicable to their job. You should have a process approach, and that includes making decisions based off data, based off evidence. So if you're, for example, introducing a new process because you have a lot of complaints, then you have some evidence that you've analyzed those complaints, you've understood the problem, maybe you've done root cause analysis, and that will help you then on your journey to make process improvements. Improvement, you'll see this in every ISO standard. Every ISO standard asks for improvement. So your continuous service improvement plan. You will have one. I have no doubt that you have a list of things that you know you have to fix. And it's just about structuring it in a way that's consistent. And that's what ISO 9001 asks you to do. Then it also looks at relationship management. So this is with your supply chain. So how are you cascading your requirements through? How are you onboarding new suppliers? Do you have a process where you're able to vet whether they're suitable or not? Quite often, we find that we are part of this process, and we're always more than happy to help. And this is where we provide our own ISO 9001 certificate as a means of demonstrating that we have the right capability around these things to service our customers. The key thing I think it's worth taking away from around quality management is don't see it as a separate piece of work. It's a business improvement tool. It's a way that you can get better. And that's really, really important, because if you look at it in a siloed approach as, oh, that's just ISO and we just do ISO, or that one person does ISO, you won't get the benefit of it. There's no point doing it. Eventually it will break. But see it as just an underpinning to the good work you're already doing. And I think that's the key thing to look at with quality management. What we see is 9001 is a must-have. It's a mandatory. We're not eligible for tenders and bids unless we have this. It's really, really key to us. And it's from our own data, we're seeing that it's 90% plus of our customers are asking for evidence that we conform with 9001. Now, that evidence typically for us is production of a ISO certification, so quality management certification, which we have with the British Standards Institute, or BSI. But there's lots of organisations you can get certified by. But that's quality management. We'll move on. So 27001, information security management. So ISO 27001 is about selecting adequate and proportional controls to protect information assets. Now, what does that mean in reality? Just sounds like a lot of management speak, really. So it's not about overkill. It's about understanding your business and determining what you have to do to protect those assets. How important are those assets to you? So some things are more important than others, and we know that. It's 27001 gives you a mechanism to quantify that, and it quantifies them based around three things: the confidentiality of the information, its integrity and availability. So confidentiality, fairly straightforward. It's what's the risk to you if that information got into the wrong hands? Now that can be the wrong hands internally, or it can be the wrong hands externally. So it covers inside threats and external threats. Around integrity, how valuable is the accuracy of your data? You know, we always say, you know, data out is only as good as the data in. And there is that element within the information security standard. What's the chance it could be compromised? We see a lot around CryptoLocker, which is a virus that will encrypt all your folders, and you have to pay a ransom, typically in Bitcoin, to have it unlocked. Well, obviously, the effect on the integrity of your data there is devastating. You don't have access to it. It could be compromised and corrupted as part of that process. And then around availability. A lot of people think that availability is about having 100% uptime. Well, it's not. It's about having the uptime that you have determined you need. It's about having information available when you need it. So you may not need data to be available between 11 o'clock at night and midnight. So it doesn't have to be 24/7, 365. It's about having it when you need it and having an approach to understand what the criticality is. Now, as telcos, yes, typically it is about uptime of the service. Are we talking about 99.99% uptime? And then how you quantify whether you've operated within those boundaries. So it can be that you have outages, but they're planned and they don't affect your availability stats because you've communicated out with your customers, because you're making improvements to a particular part of the network. Or it can be that somehow there's been a failure and you've fallen below that because of a component failure or a change that's gone wrong. Information security availability management is about understanding that process. First, understanding what your target is, and if you fall below it, understanding why and doing something about it. We mentioned root cause when we were talking about quality management. Root cause analysis runs through all ISOs. Understand why something went wrong and then to try and fix it. It's important to bear in mind that it isn't just an IT standard. It's not an IT security standard. It covers HR, how you bring new staff on board, what vetting do you do? It covers how you train them as they're with you, and it covers how you maybe disable their access when they leave you. So that whole lifespan of an employee, it will cover that. It will cover site security, and it will also cover IT security as well. It will look at remote working, malicious code, network controls. It goes all the way through to clock synchronization, which is incredibly important in the event that you have a breach. and you need to know when a particular breach happened in multiple systems. So it will cover down to that level of detail. It is the government's baseline control set. If you are bidding for government work, they will ask you to align to 27001. Almost every document that I see from government refers to 27001. And in fact, the UK had a huge hand in creating that international standard. It was previously a British standard that's been slightly amended but adopted internationally. So it's a must-have as a result for customers of technology-dependent businesses. If you are providing cloud, if you're providing hosted voice, if you're providing anything which people consider to be tech-related, I'd be surprised if they've not already asked you, do you comply with ISO 27001? And then there's the difference between complying with 27001 and being certified to 27001. And some businesses will go that extra step and ask you for that certificate. Quite often though, we'll see people saying, can you, or organizations asking, are you aligned to 27001? And that's considered acceptable. It's worth mentioning the trend has changed recently. So 5 years ago, aligning to 27001 was enough. Right now, customers want evidence. The overwhelming majority want to see some proof that you are assessing yourself against 27001. We've already talked about risk management. In 27001, in this management system, it's risk management in relation to CINA, in relation to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So you focus in those three areas, because something could be a risk to the confidentiality of the data, but not to the availability of it. So you do need to separate that out. And as mentioned, every tender document for technology services asks for this or similar. Now, it's rare that someone will accept something like Cyber Essentials and not want you to have 27001. They tend to want both. They do start with 27001 and build on top of that. But there are other information security certifications that are available, and Cyber Essentials is one of them. Okay, we'll move on. So you're thinking about starting your ISO journey. Feels like a bit of a mystery. So let's go through 5 things that I think you should be thinking about. So have one approach to risk. If you are undertaking an ISO project and you maybe are thinking about doing 2 ISOs, quality and information security, you don't have to have 2 approaches to risk. And my advice would also be, keep it simple to begin with. You can have a risk management system that is built on red, amber, green. So you give it a score and it falls into one of those 3 categories. What I see very common in organizations is a 5x5 scoring system. So you score 1 through to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest risk, for how likely is something to happen. So if we're talking about quality management, how likely is it that you will have process failures through 1 to 5, where you have it once a year, maybe once every 5 years, maybe once a day. And then a score of 1 to 5 for the impact. So 1 being low impact, 5 being high impact. So, and then you multiply those 2 things together. So if something is going to cost, say, £1 million to remedy, if it materializes, you score it a 5. And if it's very likely to happen, you score that a 5. That will give you a score of 25. Then you say that's a high risk. Now, I see that quite often in organizations. They have this 5x5 scoring system. But like I say, red, amber, green works just as well. If you want to keep it simple, start with red, amber, green. That's the way to go. Scope. Now, you must have a very clearly defined scope before you start this process. Is it going to be all of your products? Because it is legitimate to have one product in scope to begin with. You may provide multiple products, but you start with that one. You get good at that one product, and then you move on to the others. Likewise with people. It should ultimately apply to all your people, but you can start with just a team, and let's do ISO within a team. That's okay. Think about your sites. If some sites are out of scope because they don't do any relevant work, that's fine. If some people and sites are outsourced, perhaps, you may want to get evidence of their conformity, but not include them within the scope of your management system, because you're not going to be auditing them because they're outsourced. And think about which processes you want to include. My suggestion would be have a look at what data you already have, and using that data, pick problem areas. Where are you getting process failure? Start there, get the low-hanging fruit. So scope is really important. Don't take on too much early doors. Think about your policies. Think about an integrated management system. Now, what that means is that some documents just use the same document for different things. You don't have to have 2 internal audit policies. Just have one, and that references both ISOs. You don't have to have 2 approaches to how you control documents. Just have one. 9001 asks you for that, so does 27001. So just consolidate it and make it less work for you in the long term, because it's more likely to be sustainable if you do that. Leadership, you've got no chance if your leadership aren't engaged. So we're very fortunate here in DWS that we have a very active, engaged leadership who challenge us to do more ISOs actually, and that's because they see the value in it. But if you're working in a different environment, you're going to find it very hard to, again, make it sustainable, because if the leadership don't buy in, the teams won't buy into it as well. So the first thing you do with leadership is explain the benefits of doing this project. And if you can demonstrate some return on investment, some ROI, that will help inevitably. And then look at how you're going to train your team. Now, ISO training doesn't have to be going to an external provider. It can be the internal training you do. But don't spend more time and money having ISO audits, external audits, versus the training that you do, because you're spending more time on the exam than you are the prep for the exam. That doesn't really make sense. So get your training sorted. Get your teams ready for this before you call in external auditors. It's also one of the requirements that you do train your staff. So your auditor would be asking for it anyway. But like I say, it can be internal training. It doesn't have to be going to expensive providers. And you're also more than welcome to speak to your account manager, and maybe if you're on this journey, we can give you some pointers as well. We'd be happy to help. So I wanted to call out on this next slide some of the similarities and differences within ISO standards. I've put environment in here as an additional because it just shows how there's a lot of common deliverables in these frameworks. But we're not going to spend time going into the environmental standard. We can do that later if there is that request to do so. And we'll do another webinar. So you can see from the column in the left, risk, leadership commitment, competence and training, internal audit, management review. Every ISO standard asks you to do that. Now, risk we've talked about, we've mentioned leadership and commitment, as well as competence and training. Internal audit, it is just that. It's someone within your organization checking that you are complying with the requirements of the standard. It doesn't have to be someone external. You don't have to use one of the big 4 accountants to do that. You can do that yourself. And again, it's something that we can help point you in the right direction for how to structure audit plans if you just have a quick question around that. Management review is an annual review where your senior managers review the data that you have gathered as part of running that management system. So that's complaint data, near misses, your high risks in particular. These are our high risks. This is what we're doing about it. Any training requirements, any resource requirements you have, you go through that, you document that, and you draw out, like any good meeting, you draw out some actions and you work through those actions. And that will probably feed into your improvement plan anyway, because your improvement plan and risks inevitably are going to be linked. And then a statement of applicability is a final area, slightly unusual. So many of the standards read very similar, and all these three do for many areas. But information security asks you to create something called a statement of applicability. Now, there's in one of the annexes, Annex A to the standard, there is 100+ individual security controls. I've mentioned them briefly when I talked about control of malicious code or clock synchronization. So for those 100, you just need to create a document that shows that you've considered why you are or are not implementing that control. And that's a key difference for information security. Now, the helpful thing there is it helps you draw out your gaps, because if you're not doing something, you can ask yourself, well, why aren't we doing this? And there's an international standard who have an international committee who brought the best practice from around the world to say this is the minimum that you should be doing. So it's a nice tick list for you to do as well. What we do see quite often is companies asking for our statement of applicability. They want to know which controls we have adopted, and they tend to be public documents as well. So that's worth bearing in mind. It can be a useful tool to win new business because you can show how much you've considered. Okay, so just a quick slide now on some data that we've come across on how ISOs help you and your business. So the British Standards Institute commissioned the Centre for Economic and Business Research to do some studies into standards and the benefits of those standards. And I was really surprised when I first read this, but in sectors where standard use is prevalent, so you get a lot of it in tech, a lot of it in aerospace as well, over a 9-year period, there was a 20.1% increase in productivity compared to just 4.9% where standards were not used. And that consistency of process, I think it demonstrates how effective it is in improving your business. Around reputation, 84% of businesses said that using standards enhance their reputation. And part of the benefit is you're more likely to have products and services that work. And so your customers are likely to have higher levels of satisfaction if you've got repeatable processes, if you're constantly improving, if when people or organizations complain, that you do something about it. It's business good practice I'm sure you're already doing, but you can see here how much it's appreciated when standards are used. And around quality, 70% felt that standards had improved the quality of their suppliers' products and services. I think that's really interesting as well, because it goes both ways. Yes, you're talking about customers, but you're also looking the other way and saying, is my supply chain delivering exactly what I want? Are things constantly failing? Is that because they don't have a process approach? Is that because they're not doing root cause analysis? And this is where ISO comes in. So I thought that would be really interesting just to provide you with some background as to how it can improve your business and for the next few years, hopefully continue improving. Okay, well, that's the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for the time you've taken to listen to our understanding of ISOs, how they work. We've got a lot of years experience dealing with ISOs for a long time. You know, we've implemented these things and we've done it very carefully and rigorously, and we've seen the benefit of it, which is why we're happy to share. Keep an eye out for some future webinars on 27001 risk management and Ofcom's general conditions. But if you do have any questions, send them in to us, contact your account manager, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you again for your time.